we are also joined tonight by our co-host for the evening, Janice Burrows, a teacher and great friend of John's ever since they worked together at BBC Information. So thank you to Janice for joining us this evening as well.
Thank you.
To kick off the evening, we're going to first start with some extracts from John, and Janice will be asking some of her own questions. After that, John will be answering questions from the audience. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, please don't forget to submit your questions to our live Q&A, either via Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can drop them in the comment box. Just a quick reminder also to everyone watching that In the Shadow of the Crane is available to buy either on the Ringwood website. Just head to the bookshop section on the website and it'll be under non-fiction, or it's also available on Amazon. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Janice and John, if that's okay with you.
Thanks, Mia.
Hello. Hello, Janice.
Hi, John.
Right. First of all, I'd like to say I dedicate this writing to my friend George Miller, who sadly died in July. The writer Terry Pratchett said, "No one is actually dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away." In that case, my friend will be with me for quite a long time. The first reading involves the fact that I've wrote this autobiography. It took me a long time to decide to write it. On the one hand, I thought that such writings were restricted for the rich and famous, and on the other, there is no real reason why an ordinary guy with no claim to fame should not write about his life. I had my Warhol moment in 1959 when I drove a 1949 Jaguar from inside a car showroom through a plate glass window and out into the street. I got my picture in the Daily Express the next day. I got some letters from teenage girls and I decided to visit the one who lived nearest. She lived in the quaint village of Drumchapel. When I knocked on the door, she opened it, but before anything could be said, her father appeared, chased her inside, and threatened to beat me up. Fame, obviously, wasn't for me.
And you know, John, I remember you talking about that. I remember when we shared time together at the BBC and afterwards, and you always spoke about that time. And you showed me the photograph and the report that was in the newspaper at that time. Do you think that was a point in your life where you kind of thought, well, where do I go from here? What's next on the agenda for me? Or do you think that basically thought, how does life get better than this?
Well, I thought the first place I had to go was look for another job. And I remember the article in the Express said John had looked all yesterday afternoon for a new job, but hadn't found one yet. Now that's some reflection on the difference between employment in 1959 and employment nowadays, when people wait years and don't get a job. Here was I complaining because I'd spent an afternoon and hadn't got one.
How times change. You'd be lucky if you could get another job within months after having a start in a job like that one.
Well, the start of the book is my early life in Anderson in Glasgow. The family home was a single end at 44 Guest Street in Anderson, but I have no memory of the inside of that particular house. The first house I can remember was another single end in 25 Oak Street. The house was on the third floor of a tenement, and I remember that it had a fireplace, a cavity bed, a sink, a cupboard, and little else. It was lit by gas above the fireplace, and the toilet was on the landing downstairs. The single-end dwellings were single rooms with no bath or toilet. They were designed for 2 adults and at most 2 children under 12. In reality, much larger families occupied these hovels. Ours was a depressing house in a depressing area in a depressing society.
I think what struck me most about that section of the book, John, that you read there, was the fact that life at that point in time is often portrayed in films and news reports as being, we're all in this together. You know, weren't we happy in those days? What was the reality for your life at that point in time?
The reality was when my sister was born, I had to move and stay with my grandmother because there just wasn't enough room when I got to a certain age. The reality was terrible housing, dampness, cold, all that stuff. A lot of people that write about Glasgow years ago write it in a sort of romantic fashion, as if it was great, and you know, they all left their doors open. As Billy Connolly says, that's because he had nothing worth stealing. You know, that's the reason why you could walk out and leave your door open. I never seen a decent house till I was about 15-year-old, and that was in Kelvindale. And I didn't really realise it was ordinary people that stayed making the houses, you know, the back and front door with a window in the bathroom and a large living room and all that. So it was pretty miserable and grim, I think. It wasn't exactly Charles Dickens stuff, but it was grim.
But there's parallels, isn't there, in society to what Dickens would write and what can be life for people, you know, in the 1940s and even, I suppose, up until today as well. That's aspects of that Dickensian time is still very relevant today as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the next bit I've chosen is just to mention briefly my schooling. I hated school the first day I went there, and the feeling stayed with me for the next 10 years. Every opportunity I feigned illness or found some excuse to avoid going. And the excuses weren't difficult as I caught every sickness that was going at the time: measles, mumps, bronchitis, chicken pox, and stuff. I just couldn't settle into school at all.
What do you think it was about school that you couldn't settle into? Do you think it was the routine, the formal attitude towards kids at that point in time? Was there any aspect to your schooling that you did enjoy, or a particular teacher that you thought, that's probably romanticism as well? People who haven't enjoyed school will always reflect back on a teacher that they said, but this one teacher stood out to me. Was there aspects like that for you, or was it just something you loathed?
There was something. I think I'm still much the same today. I sort of despise authority, and I grew up that way. Anybody that had any authority, I didn't like them. They could have been nice people for all I knew, but doctors and everybody seemed to talk down to you in the days, you know, like, and even your own family. You know, like, I had an uncle who died. And it was about 6 months before anybody told me. I kept asking where he was. And then somebody says to me one day he's dead. I was about 12 at the time, and he used to take me out in his van, my Uncle Hughie, and he just vanished to me. He never turned up in any time. And then I didn't know he had a funeral and all the rest of it, and a grieving process, but never told me he was dead. So I've always been wary of people with power. It scares me. And I came up through school at a time where you were physically assaulted if you'd done something wrong, you know. The state allowed them to hit you with a big leather belt, and I got that pretty regular, you know. I take it as my attitude wasn't suitable. But I just couldn't get to it. I did have one teacher who was a French teacher that I quite liked, but I liked him because he used to bring his guitar in and play the local rock and roll music at the time. He was a great fan of Tommy Steele's, and he used to batter out Tommy Steele. And I think the music teacher used to go nuts when she heard the class or singing when she passed by, because, you know, she taught real music. So no, I was never a school person. Yet when I went to university later in life, I loved it.
Yeah.
So it was marvellous.
Yeah.
Do you want me to move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
I'll move on. I've had a novel published before, so I hope people don't think I'm that pretentious. I just wrote an autobiography on the back of one novel. But I had an idea in a file full of notes for a novel that involved reincarnation, spiritualism, a Catholic priest, a World War II soldier, and a serial killer. The character of the soldier in his early life in London was based on the writings of a colleague's father, who had begun to write his autobiography, but sadly passed on before he finished it. My colleague Anne Giles passed me her dad's incomplete manuscript, and I agreed to edit it where I could. On doing this, George Giles seemed the ideal person on which to base the character of the soldier in the book, and those parts of the book that feature George are factual. The rest is fictional. The Giles family kindly allowed me to use some of their dad's work, for which I was and still am very grateful. I wanted to write a story that moved fast, like one of my favourite novels, The 39 Steps. I wanted a book that kept the reader guessing, a book free from gratuitous sex and violence, and a book with a controversial end. After 2 or 3 years of research and writing, I thought I had just achieved that when The Italian Connection was finished. It's not a crime novel, although there are crimes in it. It's not a science fiction story, but there are elements of that genre within the writings. Nor can it accurately be described as a courtroom drama, although a court case is the core part of the tale. If it has to be described at all, it is perhaps best to call it a mystery novel.
A mystery is indeed. I think when you've talked about all the different genres that feature within the book, you know, it's where your inspiration came from that. And I think what I would like to ask you just now is, you've written this work of fiction, and now you've written your autobiography. How did the process of writing differ between the two? How did the research, obviously the research for your autobiography, it's your story, but the research for your novel as well, how did it differ between the two?
Researching your own life's not a problem, but researching a novel, depending on the subject matter, can be a problem. I won't say it was easier to write the autobiography than it was. I think it was easier to write a novel. When you think about your own life, some things start troubling you, and it's an effort to actually write about yourself.
Yep.
Whereas when you're writing a novel, you're living some other characters. You're away, you know, that takes you out. An autobiography doesn't take you away from the world, but a novel does, I think.
Yep.
And it gives you time to, you know, forget about what's round about. So I think I prefer writing a novel to writing what I've written.
Yep. Which did you struggle most with? What was the most time consuming to do, or were they both did they both take the same amount of time from you to prepare, to write? Which one took the longest?
I think the autobiography took the longest because I was encouraged to write it by the publisher, but I refused at the beginning, you know. I was taking the view that a lot of writers, famous writers take, like Daphne du Maurier, who thinks they're just self-indulgent tripe. But then I thought, well, why shouldn't I? You know, I've got a lot of stories I can tell, which was the reason why they asked me to do it in the first place. So then I changed my mind, and I went ahead and done it. So, but I think it only took about 3 or 4 months of actual writing. Whereas a novel took about 2 years, I think, to get it all together.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were writing your autobiography, have you ever been one for like keeping a diary or a journal, keeping notes, or did you find it quite easy to pull all those memories back to the forefront of your mind?
And a lot of stuff in writing, you know, a lot of documents I've got with the tribunal cases and the social security and things. And I had my BBC diaries, if you remember them.
Yeah, I do.
They were full of all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't too difficult. I've got quite a good memory, you know.
Yep.
It's a bit biased, right? But it's good memory. I only remember the good things that make me look good, right, as opposed to the things that make me look bad. But my wife says she's going to write a follow-up to this. She points out all the errors. So I don't know. I still think novel writing is more interesting than writing about yourself.
Yeah. And now you're at the end of the process where your book's actually written and it's been published. Do you feel satisfied within yourself with what you've produced? Or do you look back and say, I wish I'd included that, or I wish I had elaborated on this aspect?
I think writing an autobiography, the problem is knowing when to stop. Right? You know, where do I stop this and how do I stop it? You know, what's the end going to look like? Because the end's not here yet, really. So I'm not quite sure. No.
John, we've got a question here from Shan McCluskey. Shan asks, John, you've spoken about the romanticism of Glasgow in the past. Is there a stereotype of Glasgow or Glaswegians that is a particular pet peeve for you?
Well, I've always hated, it's not just Glasgow, but Scotland, the relationship that writers and filmmakers make we're all drunks, you know. I mean, the Duke of Edinburgh interviewed a driving instructor in Aberdeen once. We spoke to him, and he said the Duke of Edinburgh asked him how he managed to keep his clients sober enough to pass the test. You know what I mean? So that sort of thing I find quite annoying, where there's violence in Glasgow, but there's always been violence in every other city. Yeah. Violence all around the world. Yeah. But Glasgow was always sort of singled out for the Glasgow kiss and the drunks and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a good bit more to the city than that.
Absolutely. That's funny that you mentioned that there, because we've got another question just come in. We don't have a name for this question, for the person who's added this question, but they want to know what you love most about Glasgow.
I think it's really the people. I've met some absolutely crazy people in Glasgow, you know, and they are very friendly until they get a drink in them, you know. But and there's some lovely places in Glasgow. I mean, it's got great architecture. It's got, you know, the Necropolis is a great place to go for the afternoon if you like to spend it among a lot of dead people. And the art galleries, of course, and the Transport Museum, and yeah, it's an exciting place, Glasgow, an exciting city. You know, it's a different way of life living in a city than it is to living in a smaller town like where I stay now. There's a lot goes on.
Yep. I'll let you read your next part from the book, John. We've got another question there, but I'll let you go on just now with your next part of the book.
Right. This relates to my views on employment and stuff nowadays. As I touched on earlier, with me not getting a job one afternoon and being unhappy about it. In our present society, government spokespersons and economists talk about the job market. It's not a job market, it's a slave market. At the centre of this so-called market lie zero-hour contracts. The use of the term contract is misleading by itself. In law, the parties to a contract are supposed to be at arm's length with each other, but that is pure nonsense in terms of 0 hours contract. In these arrangements, all the power lies with the employer, should have said. They should be named slave arrangements, in my view. A couple of years ago, some companies began employing people without paying them anything at all. Among those cowboys were a well-known pound shop franchise. When challenged, their glib request was to say that people gained experience and doing the work enhanced their self-esteem. Glasgow comedian Kevin Bridges had a routine in which he said that their self-esteem was very low because everything in the shop was worth £1 apart from them, you know. So I sort of take that same view myself.
So you do think in terms of employment relations between employee and employer, do you think there's been any improvement in it over the years?
There's certainly a great deal of improvement in employment legislation that introduced the likes of health and safety at work, which there never was until 1974. There was improvement in employment tribunals, but they were hijacked, in my view, by lawyers at the end of the day. and became very technical, very legalistic. And the lawyers on the panel seemed to control the other two people. One was usually a business person, the other one was usually some guy for the trade unions.
Mm-hmm.
But they were all middle class.
Yep.
You know, and I don't think anyone had ever done a working class job in their life. So they became very difficult to win at as well.
Yep.
So there's a lot of good stuff coming out of Europe, and I don't know where that'll go. Some of it might just get lost at the end of the day.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, John. John, I'm going to, if that's okay with you now, I'm going to read a part from your book that when I read through your book, it really, it said a lot to me.
Right, fine.
I think that's because I'm a teacher myself. So whenever you mentioned education, I think, okay.
Aye.
My mother's attitude to education helped. She didn't really care whether I went to school or not. Being absent meant that she could send me in errands to Lindsay's Dairy and Stop Cross Street. I had an auntie who lived across the road from the dairy, and my mother always told me not to go into the shop if she was there. I expect she didn't want her to know she was getting food and credit. My dad had the same casual approach to education, having left school himself at the age of 12, and ran away to sea. He could barely read or write, but he had never been out of work, so he had never thought that there was any real value in going to school. However, whilst he was always in work, it was always poorly paid jobs, and we struggled to make ends meet. Do you think there's parallels with society today? I think that from a perspective of being involved in education, from my point of view, I don't think it's held in terribly high regard amongst certain people. Do you see parallels with what you see regarding the way people think about education today and the way they thought perhaps about it when you were growing up?
I think there's probably an element in society that don't really agree with school and couldn't care less whether their kids ever went there or not. Yep. Where there's others who want to push their kids through university and the whole lot, you know. So I do agree that I don't think teachers now have the same respect as they did at one time. But the same can apply to policemen and fire engines attacked and putting out fires, you know, with people. So we've got elements in society that don't want to join in with decent behaviour. And they'll blame everybody and anybody for their problems that they create themselves a lot of the time. You know, it's so I don't think education has got the same meaning for everybody, doesn't it? There's lots of people who couldn't care less about it.
Yep. John, if it's okay with you, I was going to go back to some of the questions that have been sent in.
Okay.
And it's basically going back to where we were maybe a few minutes ago. This has been one that's been sent in by Alex Gordon. If the novel had never been published, do you think you would have had the confidence to write the autobiography?
Probably, because I mean, I speak about myself a lot, and I tell stories a lot, and they're usually about me involved in years gone by, etc. So I probably would have written it, but whether I would have tried to get it published or no, I don't think so. I don't think I would have sent it to a publisher. No. I don't find myself that interesting, to be honest. So I don't think I would have sent that off to a publisher. I hope you're keeping well, Alec.
We've got another question here. It says, what do you think has had the largest or longest lasting impact on the city of Glasgow in the last few decades?
Oh, really, that's a bit of a question. I probably think the demolition of large parts here and turning it into a more kind of middle class area. Yeah, I think probably that. It's you don't see as much deprivation as you did in the 50s and 60s. I think it's still there, but I think it's largely hidden. And the publicity Glasgow gets nowadays is a major shopping centre and things like that. So I think the corporation is doing a lot of publicity stuff. Yeah, whether you treat it as true or untrue is a matter of and where you live in the city and what you do there.
Yeah. There's a question. This next question is actually for me, but I'll say it out loud to you as well, John. It's what is your favourite story about John that he was too scared to commit to paper?
That my
I'm
wife
really-
is wondering.
Well, exactly. I'm really not awful sure how to answer that, so I'm not at all. I think there's one thing that, and John will absolutely hate me for saying this, there's one thing that when everybody who's taken part in this tonight and anybody who does read the novel, the one thing that John does not do is blow his own trumpet. I've known John since about 1994, and throughout that whole period of time, he has been the truest friend that I have ever had, and I know he'll continue to be so. We've spent many lovely evenings together drinking pints in Pot Still. I think one of the memories that really stick out in my mind, and John, you'll probably remember this as well, this was a team night out and we all went to Mr. Singh's, do you remember, in Sucky Hall Street? And you weren't a fan of particular types of cuisine, shall we say. You like just plain food. Yeah. And I remember you going in and we had got this mixed platter of all these delicious different nuggets of joy to taste. And you asked if they did fish and chips. And they're like that, no, we don't do fish and chips. And I just remember you popping bits of food into your mouth and then taking out this freshly placed linen napkin and then just going, not for me, and just emptying things back into the napkin again. Yeah. And then numerous pints were drunk after that to wash away the flavour. That's one thing that always sticks out in my mind. It was a great night we all had out together. But out with that, I wouldn't divulge things that I think John maybe wouldn't put into his autobiography. The one thing that anybody who knows John on a personal level, or anybody who reads the novel, you'll get to know him through the novel. It's just the fact he's a real inspiration to people. He's got such a strong sense of justice and he hates to see people being taken advantage of, and he'll stand up for everybody. So if you're ever fortunate enough to meet John in the future and call him a friend, you know you've got a friend for life. I think that's all.
Well, thanks for that, Janice. I remember one other food escapade. I don't know if you were at that one. It was up in Inverary.
No.
At the Inverary Inn. We went there for a meeting, and the chef came round when we were in the bar at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he gave us a menu, and I looked at it and it was on French, so I gave him it back, and I says no thanks, and he says what's wrong? I says I don't eat anything I can't pronounce, you know. And he says, well, what do you like? I says, well, I like steak pie and potatoes and peas and that. And he says, right, okay. And that night we were all sitting in this big dining room, and he came in and the chef came in with a salver, and he took the top off it, and it don't dish steak pie, peas and Brussels sprouts. And he says to me, there you go. He says, a poor chef who can't rustle up a steak pie. And then everybody around the table started saying that wasn't on the menu. That's not on the menu. How did he get that? You know? And I says, I opened my mouth and asked him.
You've got a way of saying it like it is, but not causing offence to some people. It depends on the person. John, I'm going to step forward just now, and I'm going to read this part from your book.
Sure.
I'm going to jump forward one section actually, because I think it's a really important section to include, and I think it's important to know that, you know, there has been aspects of your life that have caused you, you know, emotional upset. And I wanted to read this small section out here. I began to feel unwell and lost some time off work on a regular basis. I had no idea what was wrong with me, but eventually Janet encouraged me to see a doctor. He diagnosed I was suffering from depression and prescribed some tablets, but they did not help. I lost weight and had fits of crying for no apparent reason. Janet went to see my doctor and told him about my behaviour, and a few hours later, he had me admitted to hospital. I knew nothing about mental illness or depression. When I entered the hospital, I believed that I was going to spend the rest of my life there. After some months, it was decided to try a treatment known as electroconvulsive therapy, commonly referred to as electric shock treatment. Janet was advised it was better not to visit immediately after I'd had the treatment, as she would see a vast improvement that suggested I was back to normal, but that it would be short-lived. I received over a dozen of these treatments, and slowly but surely, I began to regain some of my confidence, and the depressive thoughts, bouts of crying, and suicidal tendencies began to disappear. After over 3 months in hospital, I was discharged and put on medication with monthly visits to a psychiatrist. I later fully recovered, but it took around 2 years before I went back to driving lorries. As your friend, I find that a difficult part to read. And I know that to include that in your autobiography must have been difficult for you as well. What is your most stark memory of that period of time in your life?
The worst thing you can lose, in my view, in this world is your confidence, because it affects everything you do. You need confidence to go to work. You need confidence to meet people. You need confidence to carry out jobs. You need confidence to go to the bloody shops, you know. So that was gone, right? And all there was a blackness about worthlessness and all that sort of thinking. And I was on tablets for a while, none of them worked, and they offered me this treatment, and so I took it, and it was very funny in a way, because immediately after it, you felt fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you wanted to go out and sign yourself up. You know, I'm fine now. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to be in here. You know, but after about an hour or something like that, you sunk away back down again. That's why the doctors told Janet not to come immediately after one of these treatments, because people just assumed, oh, he's back to normal, he's fine. Mm-hmm. But it died away. But it took a long way to get there. But it got there in the end. Bit by bit, you began to feel things coming back.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a very bad time. It lasted, I think, about 2 years before I was back to what I would call normal, if I'm normally starting. So yeah, that was bad. You know, it's funny, when I was a smoker, now and again, the lighter went up, you burnt your singed your eyebrows or your hair, and that smell of burning hair has remained with me, because that's what I smelt when I woke up for the anaesthetic every time I'd had a treatment. So there must have been something there. The electric thing was singeing your hair a wee bit. Yeah. So when I smell that burning hair nowadays, it takes me right back to that days. But I got my aim back in a psychiatrist. I don't know if I've told you this before, but I was driving a truck through into air, and I was going to park up and go to this cafe for my tea, and the car in front of me pulled in, and it was him, the guy, it was a doctor. So I drove in behind him, I slammed on the air brakes, you know, and it went shoosh, you know, and he jumped back up on the pavement. I'm down out the car and I says to him, how's your nerves? And he looked at me and he went, it's you. So yeah, I had great treatment for that illness. Great people, I'll never forget them. They were in Ailsa Hospital, and yep, they really cared.
Yep.
But it got me back on my feet.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It did. I'll move on, John, and I think that we're taking a wee jump forward in time in your life. And obviously you've had lots of different jobs through the past, but then you went back to uni again and you did your law degree. And this one is about my first lecture had around 16 students over a broad age range. Their main subject of study was travel and tourism, which was aimed at people wanting to work in the holiday business. The course included a trip to Spain, which I suspect was why it was oversubscribed. I was made aware that the decision to include an employment law module had not been met with enthusiasm. I advised them that in my view, all knowledge had value, and maybe someday when their boss was giving them a hard time in the travel agency, they would be thankful they knew their rights at work. However, they were clearly unimpressed, so I sent them for a break. On the return, it was clear their lack of enthusiasm had not waned. When they were seated and started staring forward with that "so teach me" look, I turned my back on them, rolled down the chalkboard and wrote the words "fuck off" across it in large letters. I turned, threw the chalk on my desk and looked at their silent faces. "Now," I said, "if your boss ever tells you to fuck off, the question is, what do these weird words mean in law? Are you dismissed?" In a case entitled Footy versus Brex in 1974, that was indeed the question the law lords sought to answer. Footy gutted fish in Hull docks. One day he complained that the fish were too small for filleting, and his boss told him if he didn't like it, he could fuck off. He did exactly that, and later complained at a tribunal that he was entitled to dismiss himself and claimed constructive dismissal. Classic John Keeman. Classic.
Yeah. Well, their faces when I turned round for that blackboard was a picture. Because the range for about 18 to 50 odds, the range group, and they were sitting with their jaw hanging down going, what the hell is this? So maybe that's how I never got much lecture work after that. Yeah. I remember there was one particular student in that class who knew everything about employment law. She told me every day. She knew this and she knew that, and she didn't need to do this and she didn't need to do that. And it doesn't matter, she didn't know anything. She struggled with most of what she was saying. But it was a good experience of teaching. And I thought, I don't really think I fancy that much,
Yep.
But enjoyed it at the time.
Yeah. We fast forward again and to your days at the BBC Action Line.
Oh, yeah.
And we both have really fond memories of one point in time, and then things changed to quite a sudden change where, as I'll read just now, the whole motivation for the business changed from being social action to suddenly being driven by profit. So I'll read this section out, and again, it's a classic Keemanism, shall we call it. Profit was now the main objective, and all sorts of management tools were introduced to get as much work out of staff as possible. Targets, key performance indicators, monthly appraisals, and a whole host of managerial jargon had entered the normal vocabulary. Staff were encouraged to be critical of their own performance during their appraisals, but I point blank refused to criticise my own work. In one appraisal form, I paraphrased Philip Larkin's poem, "They fuck you up, your mum and dad." I'll read this for you now. "They fuck you up, your managers. They always mean to, and they do. They fill you with your thoughts and fears, and then add extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by Harvard suits and cashmere coats, who half the time were sober stern and half the time were drunk as stoats. O's hands on misery to man, it deepens as a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and tell them, go and fuck yourself." My appraiser asked me if she wanted me to take this seriously, and I told her. Poet Philip Larkin was offered the position of Poet Laureate in 1984, so they took him seriously enough. Industrial relations were pretty poor, and over the coming months, some staff left, some raised grievance procedures, others joined a union, and some people, quite openly, became management lackeys. It had gone from being the best job I ever had to being just a job. Memories of that time, John?
Well, at the beginning, it was definitely the best job I'd ever had. It combined all the things I liked: speaking to people, doing research, writing stuff for other people to use. But it was run of the days by the BBC's charity, and they spent £5 million a year on this I always thought it had something to do with a licence fee to protect it. Well, the BBC would be the only organisation at that time that could turn around and say to the government, we spend £5 million a year trying to help people. So I thought maybe that was a cynical way of looking at it. But it really was a great job, and you learn so much. And I remember the first director that I was under, John O'Neill, he took great pride in the fact that he had so many percentage degree level people, MAs, BAs, you name it. Over 90% of the people had been at university and got some sort of degree or other. And it was great meeting these different people who had all this different knowledge. I mean, we worked alongside nurses and doctors and lawyers. John Clark was a lawyer, I think. You remember John?
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to do this job. You know, when we had trails going out, people come back in for their lunch and straight onto the phones. And you know, I remember that the Panorama programme took 62,000 calls in one night. So it was a very, it was a just do it job, you know, like if you had ideas, you could put them into operation and somebody would come along and help you with it.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was an unbelievable place to work. I don't think there's ever been an organisation quite like that. There's been call centres. Everybody knows what a call centre is, but this wasn't a call centre.
No.
It never had that attitude. But it became a call centre when it was taken over by a private company to run it. And they had their own way. It was them that introduced all these appraisals and self-criticism. I mean, I just think that's rubbish. You know, your boss gets paid, right, to watch you and to see if you're suitable for the job. He can criticise all he likes, but to ask individual workers to sit down there and put in writing that they've got these weaknesses and that weakness, you know. I mean, my view was, I don't have any weaknesses and you can take that whatever way you like, you know. So, yeah, it became quite, to the extent that I wanted out, and I got out in the end before they get rid of me.
That probably sets up the next bit that I was going to read
Oh,
then.
does it? Right,
Yeah,
okay.
it probably does. I was seated at my desk one Friday afternoon when a director and my boss came into the phone room, both walking with purpose. They headed straight for my desk, and when they got there, the director proceeded to shut down my computer. My boss told me I was suspended and have to leave the building. I've always found it better to comply with this kind of melodramatic approach by some managers and deal with it when you get the official reasons for their actions in writing. So I left. I went to my local pub in Hope Street for a beer and met with a few of my mates who worked in the city and finished early on Fridays. I was sitting having a drink with them and relating what had happened when my mobile phone rang. It was my boss telling me I could come back to work. I told her I was now acting in the capacity of a private individual and she could fuck off, and hung up. She called me back again and I told her she had no idea what she was doing and to put everything in writing and send it to my home. I'd long dealt with jumped up little pricks like this, and there was nothing to fear from this pair of drama queens. A letter duly arrived, and I went to a meeting where they alleged that I had sent an email to a member of staff who was off sick, and managers were not permitted to contact staff in such circumstances. Frankly, I had never heard such rubbish, and when I asked who found the email, they refused to tell me. The problem with what they were saying was that the email was a personal contact between me and a dear friend who remains so to this day. It could not be construed in any way, shape or form as harassing an employee who was off sick. It was all nonsense and another example of how managers tried to bully staff they did not like or agree with. Another example, John, of things that you've had to deal with and people without your knowledge and expertise, not just from the training you did at university, knowing your legal rights and your employment rights, but also having the wealth of experience and the wealth of knowledge of knowing lots and lots of people through the years, that you could stand up and really just stand up for yourself in that kind of situation where other people might have crumbled?
Yeah, there was an element of bullying. Some people reported it to the press at the time, and I believe the Sunday Mail done an article on it, and we did have a visit from an MP, I remember. There was an element of that. It came to the point where I believed my face just didn't fit in there. They wanted to do things that I didn't think we should be doing, so I put obstacles in their way, quite a lot of the time. And, I think that got them to the point where they thought we need to find something to build up a case against this nutter and get rid of him. I think that was their view. When I eventually agreed to leave and they agreed to make me redundant, the director I spoke with, he denied any of that. He said that wasn't the case, and there was always a place for me there. But I was only 2 years short of retirement, and I thought, I better get out now. It was sad to watch it going the way it did, and to watch the cynicism that creeped in, and the idea of trying to restrict how long somebody could speak to someone on the phone and that sort of thing that was coming in, and it just wasn't suitable anymore. I didn't want to do the job anymore.
Yeah. I've got one final piece to read here.
Okay.
John. I must say, she looked better than she had in a while and was quite upbeat about things. You'll get fired this morning, I said. I hope you're right, she replied. Less than an hour later, I got a call and went over to Costa in Sauchiehall Street. On seeing me enter, she beamed from ear to ear. I knew at once she'd been dismissed, and I thought, I've never seen anyone look so happy in losing their job. Now comes the difficult bit, I said. How do we get the bastards to come up with some decent compensation? Her dismissal generated a series of letters, all in the same vein. The dismissal was not fair and reasonable in all the circumstances. The company should have considered alternative employment, and failing a reasonable offer, we would raise a claim at the Employment Tribunal. My colleague had plans for her future and wanted to train as a teacher. She was in her early 30s and perfectly capable of achieving her aim if she had the financial assets. I had a figure in mind, but I continued to reject a series of offers that I said were derisory. Eventually, I prepared papers for the tribunal and had the case registered. The case was far from airtight and I'd seen stronger cases fail. I was also concerned that she'd taken the decision to trust my judgment without question and go against the views of her shop steward and the union lawyer when I disagreed with their interpretation of the case. I would have collapsed in a heap if we'd lost after refusing a series of offers. Another offer was made, and it was quite an increase from the previous. I was still inclined to reject it, but I decided that we should arrange an appointment with her union lawyer and ask if she would represent her at the tribunal if she refused this later offer. The lawyer's view was that she thought it could not improve on the offer being made, and it was likely that a tribunal would make a lesser award if indeed they decided that she had been unfairly dismissed. As we walked along West George Street into town, I asked her if what she was offered would cover her teaching training. She indicated that it would. We stopped at the junction with Hope Street. Take the money, I said. Become a teacher. It's an honourable profession. She took this advice in the same way she'd taken the other advice I'd given her and has been teaching ever since. I've never really met anyone who trusted me so much, and I was relieved when she called me later to say that she'd sent a letter accepting the offer. Quite a pressure to be put on you there.
I think it's something self-inflicted. You know what I mean? You take these things on and, you're terrified of losing. I don't like losing, I'll not do anything to win, but I don't like losing against big business, big government, or the other big people. But if you've got a case and you can get your points across, there's no reason why we should lose all the time, you know, just because we're no them.
Yeah.
So you win some cases and it makes you feel good that you've managed to do something for somebody. When you lose, it makes you feel sad that you've lost. But you can't do one without the other, you know.
Yeah.
So either you do that sort of thing or you don't. And if you do and you lose, you've got to accept you've lost, you know. Although I say that with biting my tongue at the same time. I don't think I've ever accepted a defeat in my life. You know, I might have said it on that rubbish, but, you know, it hurts. Really hurts.
Yep. John, I'm going to go over now. We've got some more questions there.
Fine.
So I'll go through them just now with you.
Okay.
Having previously written fiction, do you find it more emotionally tolling process to write when the characters were people you knew? That's from Chloe Murphy.
I think that's true, you know. First of all, you don't want to write things in such a way as to, you know, make them feel bad about themselves. So I think, yeah, characters are just characters. They're just things that come from your imagination. They might be based on some person or other, but they're really that stand up for themselves, or they should anyway if you're a writer. But writing about real life is different altogether. You're bound to offend somebody.
Yeah.
You know, no matter how you write it or what you write. And I don't like necessarily offending people, but life's life. You know, I get offended as well.
Yeah. Yep. This one here is from Nicola Campbell. Are you excited to hear the public's reaction to your book?
It's had some very good reviews so far. Yeah, it's good to get told what people think. You know, that's not a glib statement. That's a fact. You know, you'll not like it if they say something bad about it. I'll not like it, but the thing is that you need it as a writer. You need to be told whether your stuff's rubbish or not. There's that old adage that everybody's got a book in them. But that Hitchens, you know the guy I'm talking about, the commentator, he says that's true, and in most cases that's exactly where it should stay.
Do you think you fall into that category? Surely not.
No, I don't think so.
No. The last question we've got here, there's no name for it. Has writing a memoir always been an aspiration of yours?
Not really, no. I was encouraged to consider it by Sandy, the publisher. I think I said this earlier.
Yeah.
And at the beginning I said no. I had a view that if you're going to write an autobiography, you have to write the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And I thought I wasn't for doing that. But Sandy was always on me telling stories, and he says, asked me if they were true or not. And I said, of course they are. So he said, you should really write it. So I changed my mind and I went ahead and wrote it.
And how do you feel about the fact it's down in paper now?
Quite apprehensive.
Why?
I don't know. Some people think it's just pretentious tripe if you write your own life, you know. And I mean, if you look at all the famous authors and you look at the number of them who wrote autobiographies, it's pretty low percentage, you know.
But then maybe they didn't have a good story in them.
Well, they'd been writing good stories, you know. Daphne du Maurier was a great writer, and she thinks. Oscar Wilde says a man's autobiography is in his face.
Careful.
And a woman's a pure work of fiction. A woman's face is a pure work of fiction. We can leave it at that, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Again, thanks so much.
Spending time with you tonight, John. It's been great. It really has. Thanks,
I
Mia.
really enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody for their help with this. Okay.
No problem. Just before we sign off for the evening, we're just hopefully going to be joined by Lindsay from Ringwood to discuss about the Ringwood's connection with Arlington Baths. I'm hoping we might be able to get her. Did she know?
But yay!
Hi.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just a couple of sentences for me. Just to say, John, that was fascinating. Such interesting stories and such rich history to hear about from such a fascinating life. So it was fantastic. And again, it's been a real pleasure tonight. This event is brought in partnership with the Arlington Baths, of which I've been a lifelong member, and it's been fantastic that even in these bizarre and strange times that we're in, that we've been able to continue to do the partnership work between Ringwood Publishing and the Arlington Baths, which is now in its 6th year. And it strikes me that one of the things I love about the Baths is meeting people like you, John, in all walks of life. That's one of the venues that you can meet them. So it's why it's such a nice partnership between the two organisations, and it's been fascinating tonight. So thank you very much, John, for your time.
Well, thank you. Very much appreciated.
Okay, I'm gonna pass back to Mia, I think.
Okay, no problem. Thanks so much. Yeah, just to repeat what Lindsay said, thanks very much to you both. It was a fascinating discussion, really interesting to listen to. And I feel like we could have a whole evening of your anecdotes, John, because they're amazing. But unfortunately, I think that's about all we've got time for. So thanks very much again to both of you, and thanks everybody for joining, and some great questions from the audience. So thanks very much. Good night, everybody.
Right,
Thanks,
good
Mia.
night.
Good night, everyone.